Lib Dems should not have the wool pulled over their eyes about Nicola Sturgeon of the SNP. They are just as antagonistic and nationalist as the Brexiteers.
Hello and welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. As promised, we have got the leader of the Scottish LibDems, Alex Cole-Hamilton. Thank you, Alex, for joining us on this podcast. I brought David along as well, who always likes to come in and give the tough questions while I do the nice stuff. So firstly, welcome to the podcast, Alex.
Thank you both. It's great to be here.
Obviously, you're in your office at the moment, it looks like.
Yes, I'm in the Scottish Parliament, and I will hot-foot it from this recording to the chamber, where I will be grilling the First Minister of Scotland on ambulance waiting times, which are pretty horrendous in Scotland right now.
Well, that actually comes to one of the big questions we get a lot, and actually, unfortunately, a lot from English Lib Dems is actually sometimes, well, are the Lib Dems in Scotland really needed? Aren't the SNP quite nice? Ooh. Your response to that would be?
Ouch. Yeah, no is the answer. I mean, that's one of the frustrations we've seen. We see it in the London commentariat quite a lot, that they quite like the idea of the SNP as being this insurgent force coming to stick it to Boris every now and again. But actually, they are nationalists in the same way that Brexiteers are nationalists. For all that Lib Dem south of the border think of the idea of self-determination as being some kind of cuddly option, yeah, self-determination matters if you're being oppressed or if you're trying to escape a civil war or something like that. But Scotland is none of those things. And actually, we have been trapped in this clash of nationalisms in Scotland, by which I mean the nationalism of Boris Johnson's Brexiteers, but also the nationalism of the SNP. And they are as driven by identity and pine for ancient nations that they mythologize about in the same way that the UKIP and the Brexit Party do. So Lib Dems should not have the wool pulled over their eyes about Nicola Sturgeon of the SNP. They are just as antagonistic and nationalist as the Brexiteers.
And before David comes in, I suppose one of the things I was reading the transcript of your speech when you became leader, and the idea, it must be very difficult, and that was all about hope and a better future. Dealing with two different sets of nationalists, both in Boris Johnson with English nationalism, and then Nicola Sturgeon, the SNP, with Scottish nationalism, while trying to say, look, we can do better than this. That's a tough gig to have.
It is. And I think that actually, though, it's a tremendous opportunity for our party as well, because I've knocked tens of thousands of doors in the last few years, and people are sick of that constitutional washing machine. They are fed up of the sum total of public debate in this country being categorized as whether you're for another independence referendum or you're against it. I mean, there are warning lights blinking across the dashboard of public policy in Scotland, whether that's in the fact that more than 1,000 kids are waiting 2 years for first-line adolescent mental health care, or it's the fact that Scotland has the worst drug death rate in the entire world. I mean, these are things that the business of government should be focused on, yet we have been held back by ministerial disinterest in all of these things. Why? Because they are chasing that greater prize of separation from the UK.
Hello, John from the Lib Dem Podcast here. We are delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by Prater Rains. Now more than ever, you need a professional-looking online presence and website. Prater Rains have been helping Liberal Democrat campaigns succeed for 18 years. Their Lib Dem Foci package combines a website, social media and email system to help Lib Dems win. You'll receive great support from real people, fair pricing and a huge range of features to choose from. Prater Rains are already the bespoke developers for Lighthouse, Lib Dem Draw Online and the LD Directory. They combine a talented system design with an unrivaled understanding of our party, our data and our systems. To find out more, check out the Prater Rains website at praterrains.co.uk/liberal-democrats.
Yeah, Alex, it's nice to see you and appreciate you coming on, and obviously good to chat. We talked about a little bit. John started off talking about sort of the English party and certain members of the English Liberal Democrats thinking the SNP are lovely and cuddly. Just to kind of take it slightly back, what would you say to people who perhaps south of the border accuse us as Scottish Liberal Democrats of going towards a UK nationalistic language and really pushing the UK? What would your thoughts be on that?
I mean, I think that's a fair question, but what I would say is I'm trying to distinguish ourselves from the Conservatives. And I've been asked many times if I would stand with the Conservatives to defend our place in the UK in a future referendum. There was a reason why when Douglas Ross, who was the leader of the Scottish Tories, when he asked Anna Sarwar, the Labour leader, and Willie Rennie, for a pan-unionist alliance, that both of them rightly refused him. Why? Because Douglas was trying to get us to subscribe to the Conservative vision of this bitter, broken United Kingdom. I do not subscribe to that at all. I believe in what Britain can be, that open, internationalist of outlook, welcoming country that we used to be and we are celebrated for in periods in our history. So I'm not a British nationalist, I'm an internationalist, and my devastation at what happened with Brexit and leaving the European Union is still very raw. But I could not meet the loss of one international union I care about by jettisoning the other international union I care about, that being the United Kingdom. And the final thing I'll say is this: the idea that Scottish independence is a fast-track way back for Remainers in Scotland into the European Union is a fantasy. It is a mirage. First of all, we wouldn't have a referendum for years because we would need to understand what the divorce bill from the rest of the UK looked like. We'd need to win that. There's no guarantee of that because actually there's a big chunk of Scotland that is very Eurosceptic. But also, the European Union may not have this for years. They may not entertain our membership because the SNP have said that they want Scotland to keep using the pound. EU wouldn't let us join if we're using the currency of a non-member state. And our deficit, we have been subsidised by Westminster for need to pay down a monstrous deficit, even just to get to the races in terms of accession. So it's not a question of being a Brit nationalist. It's about being an internationalist and recognising, holding on to the union we've got and working with our partners in the rest of the UK to forge closer links with the EU going forward.
Thank you. I just want to take it back slightly because obviously we're introducing you as the new leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats and congratulate you first of all on that win. And also wanted to, for anybody who's listening to the podcast that doesn't know, Alex is now obviously the highest polling politician by votes in the Scottish Parliament, beating out the second place by about 9,000 votes. So congratulations on that as well. But I just wanted to, for people who maybe don't know you, know your background, what I really wanted to ask is, what led you to liberalism? What makes you a Liberal Democrat, and how did you get involved in politics?
Well, I think there's two things. Firstly, family. So my dad was is still a member of the party and had me delivering leaflets for Ming Campbell in 1987 in Good Mornings when I was 10 years old. I was in the political wilderness while I was a student. I sort of ran for student political elections on the banner of independent left. But actually very soon realised that the left wing in student politics that are completely, well, without reason or argument. And I didn't like the cut of their jib. So realised that actually I'm far more centrist, moderate. I'm definitely on the left wing of the party. But the other thing I think is my Quakerism. It's not something I talk about a great deal. I'm not particularly religious, but I am a Quaker by choice rather than by birthright. And Quakers, I think, are very close to liberals in a lot of ways. We believe in fairness, we believe in equality, believe in social mobility and in conflict resolution through non-violence, internationalism. So it's sometimes hard for me to see where my Quakerism stops and my liberalism begins, but they walk in step and they've kind of defined my career.
Absolutely. And what's an interesting aspect as well is obviously we talked before the podcast started about you obviously come from Lancashire originally. Obviously, I guess you are really the definition of what a modern Brit is. You've moved from England to Scotland. You've made that your home. But interestingly enough, I was looking at your family background and I believe that you are not actually the first politician from the Cole Hamilton family. Your ancestors were in fact members of parliaments in Ireland and the United Kingdom.
That's right. So the first Cole Hamilton, when Arthur Cole married Letitia Hamilton in 1780, that formed the name, he was MP for Tyrone. And fascinatingly, was a contemporary of Wilberforce and the Pitt government and the rest of it. He's a Tory, so I'm not entirely sure he voted the right way on the abolition of slavery. But I like to think I'm righting some historical wrongs here. But I don't think he really set the header alight. I think that I've tried to do some research, and the only thing I can find about him of note in the sort of press of that time was that he once threw a glass at the head of a blind fiddler for playing a sectarian song in a pub in Belfast. But That's about as far as I've got into his history.
It sounds like he might have been a bit of a character then. So just taking it back to obviously, since you've taken on the leadership and obviously you've managed to get the party quite a lot in the press in terms of what's going on in Scotland at the moment, is really we trying to recover from coronavirus. And again, we see the SNP shifting focus away from the problem that's in front of them towards saying, oh, we're coming towards another referendum, perhaps next year or 2023. But I really wanted to get your thoughts on, obviously, Nicola Sturgeon's now entered into an agreement with the Scottish Green Party. The Scottish Green Party, I believe, are really pushing towards making sure there's another independence referendum. Do you think this is an absolute travesty to move us into talking about another referendum when we're still dealing with COVID and its after effects?
Yes, and I mentioned earlier about the warning lights blinking across the dashboard in terms of public policy problems that the SNP had. And it rather cynically used the pandemic to defer action on a range of issues that required their attention, whether that was the rollout of publicly funded childcare, the mental health weights, the educational attainment gaps, the fact that you had patients who've been sent a letter saying they were legally obliged to be seen within 12 weeks when there wasn't a hope in hell that they'd be seen in 50 weeks. These are the problems that we should be dealing with. And yet the SNP said, actually, we can't deal with these right now because everything needs to be focused on the pandemic. And yet, in the programme for government last year, the SNP, the First Minister, found time to make room in the legislative agenda for a bill around the mechanics of another second independence referendum. It is entirely designed to keep our troops marching. And I think it's an outrage that the party of Robin Harper, the Green Party, Robin Harper is an old friend of mine and was kicked against the old order of things and fought for reform alongside Lib Dems for a long time, that his legacy has been laid low by Patrick Harvey and Lorna Slater. The first thing in the first line of the partnership agreement is not about the climate emergency. It is about driving for another independence referendum. I cannot understand why, when on the eve of COP26, that this would be the focus of their partnership agreement. And Robin Harper, the original founder of the Greens in Scotland, would not have sacrificed nationalism for environmentalism, or vice versa rather, because he didn't support Scottish independence. He was a unionist. He is a unionist. And I think that's deeply sad. So my message is to those Green Party voters who don't want Scotland to leave the UK, and actually there are more than half of them because they did a poll on that. If you want a party that will fight the climate emergency with ferocity, but without the baggage of nationalism, which now inexplicably comes with the Green Party, you've got to come with us. You've got to vote Lib Dem.
And I'm interested because you used, sorry, David, just because in your speech you talk about the baggage of nationalism, and so far in this conversation we've talked a lot. Again, it's just gone on to the constitutional issues instead of actually there are really fundamental problems happening within Scotland that all the oxygen gets sucked out from actually being talked about that, and is probably not known at all. I mean, we have a kind of a meetings here in Lancashire about pro EU kind of meetings, etc. And all these people, again from different political persuasions, say, you know what? If Scotland goes independent, I think I'll move there. But actually, they have no idea about some. And I say to them, look, have you looked at the SNP's record in Scotland, the domestic issues? And I think that gets missed. And we've almost done it again in this meeting.
That's exactly right, and it's drowned out by the promise of this prize. And Nicola Sturgeon and the party apparatus around her have been very clever in wearing the clothes of progressive politics and talking the talk of the sort of progressive centre-left to try and capture a broad base of people. And they managed to just, there's this expression, it's a Scots expression that we use up here, or is used up here, which is called wheesht for Indy, as in hold your tongue for Indy, as in don't mention the problems because the prize is just over the horizon. And they keep everybody marching, they keep everybody's attention on that, and they've got this broad coalition. And there's also there's a fallacy, John, that that the SNP have tried to spin as well, that we have some kind of moral superiority in Scotland, that we don't vote for the parties of the hard left. Well, we do. I mean, that happens in European elections. We had a Brexit MEP like everybody else, but we don't vote for the hard left because the dark xenophobic underbelly of Scottish politics is they are actually all voting SNP because there is definitely a xenophobic wing to the SNP, and I make no apology for bringing light to that. And the evidence I give you is when we were talking about the coronavirus and public policy measures that might be adopted, and when the First Minister hinted that she might close the border between Scotland and England, you had wilder outriders of the SNP blockading Gretna, shouting at English motorists. And that's the dark side of Scottish politics.
And I would say that just to caveat that as well, it's not just activists. I mean, you have the leader of the SNP in Westminster causing Twitter pile-ons to photographers who perhaps, were up in Scotland and were there as of their right. So it seems to be that it's not just activists, it's been engaged with by the politicians themselves. But we talked about the failings here of the SNP government. I mean, time and time again, this week, another failing of the Ferguson shipyard, which is where I'm from originally, but obviously as well, the health service is failing in Scotland. You're obviously going to be questioning the First Minister today on ambulance waiting times, which is an absolute travesty. Education's failing our young children. Again, the Tories get a lot of flack for what happened last year with the exams, and that seemed to sort of be missed for the SNP. They didn't get nearly as much flack. What really do you think it's going to take for people to understand that time and time again, there's failings from all wings of the SNP, even down to Glasgow City Council and its waste management? What do we need to do to cut that message across?
I think that will happen organically. And I say that because it did. And we were very nearly, it got very close to hauling the scales away from people's eyes on this. And then two things happened. I'll come on to that in a sec. So midterm last session, so kind of 2017, if you remember, the SNP lost a lot of Westminster seats, and that was largely because people were fed up of the constant drive for another referendum, and they started to wake up to the failings of the SNP, of which they are legion. But then two things happened. Firstly, the general election of 2019, and Nicola triangulated that about not being a referendum on a referendum. It was about who do you want, Nicola or Boris, and she successfully, I think, managed to persuade people they probably wanted her over Boris. But then the other thing I think that came up immediately hot on the heels of that was the pandemic. And Scotland made the same mistakes as England. But what I think Nicola Sturgeon probably did better was the presentation of that. And she captured that. She reached out into homes where she would normally be switched off, of people who were terrified of what this threat meant, what the pandemic meant. And every lunchtime, she presented in a very solemn managerial way the new health guidance and the new measures that her government were considering. And I picked that up on the doors, and we were allowed to knock doors from August last year, and I was knocking doors, and it was devastating to find people that I had always found as either solid Lib Dems or even conservatives saying, do you know what, though, she's done such a good job, I think I probably will vote for her. And it rehabilitated the SNP. They capitalized on that public need for reassurance, and they offered that reassurance. And even though the decisions that were made in the foothills of the pandemic were catastrophic, particularly to decamp people with the virus out of hospitals into care homes, were devastating. But they did it in a very solemn managerial way. And I think it gave them a kind of get out of jail card on all those other failings. That can't last, and it won't last. And so I think that again, organically, people will wake up to their failings again.
I think we should caveat all of the elections that we've just had, both the Conservatives in England, the Labour in Wales, and the SNP in Scotland, all got a bit of a rally around the flag boost. And you're seeing it now that is now slipping. And I suppose actually for the Lib Dems who, okay, we lost a seat in Scotland, but actually we did very well. Obviously, your election was tremendous, etc. To actually have hold where we were, given that kind of effect, was actually something we can actually build on. Because, like I said, a lot of people thought, well, are the Lib Dems a spent force in Scotland? Well, actually, I think we're in a very good place to a good platform to which to build and be that kind of that sensible, moderate kind of centre-left kind of force that actually Scotland probably needs.
Exactly right. And actually the election campaign was very telling in May, because Nicola tried to make it about a mandate for a second referendum. And then about 3 weeks out from the poll, she saw it was hurting her. And the polls for the SNP were in decline. And so they pivoted and they started sending out leaflets to every house in Scotland with an empty lectern saying, who do you want to lead us out of the pandemic? And I think you're right. There was a feeling of backing a wartime government, and that's why it happened across the board. But that's going to be short-lived, I'm hopeful. And yes, and you can see, John, we had 2 spectacular local council by-election wins, and they're more spectacular in Scotland because they're STV wards, so they're much bigger council wards than listeners in England might be used to, and we won them from nowhere. So we won in Wick, in Jamie Stone's constituency. We were dead last in the last council elections and on 3%, and we topped the poll there. Inverness West, in a constituency we hold nowhere, and we won it again from nowhere, and people didn't see us coming. So it gives me such hope that there are green shoots of recovery everywhere I look.
Great. I just wanted to really touch on something else, obviously, that's come up in the news quite significantly. And obviously, you've been the kind of rallying point for this. And obviously, that's the introduction of vaccine passports. I obviously stood against Patrick Harvey, who, vehemently denied that he wanted to see vaccine passports introduced in Scotland, and now seems to have done a complete U-turn to back his new government agreement. I just wanted to get your thoughts on this, and really, has the tide turned? Can we not stop this now? And really, how do we let people know the message around what this potentially leads to?
Yes, and I think the government have miscued this, definitely. I mean, it was horrifying to see Patrick Harvey in practically his first day of ministerial office just complete 180 on this, turn tail on this, and back the government on what is a very liberal move. I mean, it looks very likely now that Scotland will stand alone in the UK as the only jurisdiction where the right to medical privacy is no longer assured, and that for the first time you will have to submit your medical records, private medical data, to a stranger who is not your clinician to access venues and services in our society. I mean, I can't believe I have to say this aloud, but you should never have to give your medical records to a bouncer to get into a nightclub. But that's effectively what's being asked. And furthermore, because we're now extending, like the rest of the UK, the vaccine programme to everyone over 12, there should be no pressure on children or their families to get the vaccine, because it's contingent on whether they get into a football stadium or not. And that's another reason why we need to scrap them now.
And when I've been trying to, because a lot of my friends have asked, what's the big deal if we need to do this, and so on and so forth. What I've really been trying to get across to them is, from a perspective of your liberties, this is something, you do it once, and then what's next? It's sort of if you're willing to give it up because of this, then when does it not become a case where you're not willing to say, oh well, we've been asked to do it, and I'm willing to.
Exactly. If you cross that line, you cross it forever. And there are circumstances where, I don't know, complete hypothetical here, say that we had a massive surge in the birth rate and we were struggling to sustain it. And then people started saying, well, if you're going to a nightclub, we want to see that you're on some kind of contraceptive medication before you come in. And, I mean, that's perhaps a slightly hyperbolic example, but once you've kind of given that away and said your right to medical privacy is no longer a right, then anything could come up in the future. And a more authoritarian, more right-wing government might use this as precedent to insist on other qualifying thresholds for access to freedoms in our society.
I think we have seen it elsewhere. I mean, the Patriot Act in the US has been very, very difficult to put that back in the box once it obviously comes out. These are difficult subjects to obviously contemplate, but they do come up, and I think people need to realise from a perspective of your own civil liberties, etc. This is something that people really want to take a stand against.
Yeah, and I think that there's also a real anxiety that the government's very good at passing swift legislation or regulations on public health measures, but it's absolutely rubbish about the back end tech behind it. So track and trace in Scotland, or test and protect, which is our version of that, is really on its knees. And the Scottish government brought it in with great fanfare, never recruited enough tracers. And right now in Scotland, if you get a positive coronavirus case, then it will be a week before they contact you to find out who you've been in touch with and how many people are they going to go and affect. So there's no clarity on how the vaccine passport system in Scotland will deal with people who've had vaccinations in other jurisdictions, particularly outside of the UK. There's no clarity on how they'll keep up with the booster program or what your requirement for that will be. There's just lots of back-end issues that we've got. But then the other thing is, how on earth, if you're in Ibrox, which is Rangers football stadium in Glasgow, on a Saturday, if you're a ticket collector at the turnstile, do you have to scan 40,000 QR codes before people get in? I mean, it's just a beggar's belief. And a lot of these questions have not been answered yet.
And I think we've seen it from Alistair Carmichael's work in Westminster to do with the coronavirus attack. What you were just saying, once politicians get power, it can be very difficult to get them off. And the whole point we're saying is, yes, we believe in these liberties, etc., but there's no point having those principles if you don't keep to them when it's tough. That's it. It's easy having principles when they're not challenged, but actually it's these points that make us who we are. And actually, furthermore to what you've just been talking about, it's the centralising nature of the SNP government, which particularly perturbs me as well, where you think, actually, if you look at their record, it's horrendous for moving away from, well, good old-fashioned community politics. What we all believe in as Lib Dems is almost the antithesis of what Nicola Sturgeon's doing at Holyrood.
That's right, John. No, absolutely. Centralising is something that is becoming a hallmark of the SNP. And you see that in the talk of the National Care Service that they want to bring into Scotland, which sounds cute and fluffy. In fact, it sounds very like our favourite national treasure, which is the NHS, but it's nothing like the NHS. The NHS was formed in the poverty and rubble of war and was delivered free at the point of delivery. Nobody's suggesting care will be delivered free at the point of delivery. This is window dressing for centralisation. They want to put ministers in charge of the delivery of care in Scotland. And yeah, I mean, vaccine passports is another it. But the Coronavirus Act in Scotland was actually, when it was first introduced, more draconian than the one in England. And I'll tell you why, because the SNP, unlike any other democracy in the entire world responding to the pandemic, suggested that we should, for the duration of the emergency, abolish jury trials. Jury trials in Scotland had continued unabated for 800 years. They had survived wars, they had survived pandemics, and yet the SNP decided that actually this was a pretty good wheeze to rattle through the docket of the backlog, and there was a backlog of criminal trials, there still is. But we stood our ground, and I did some really good work with colleagues in the Faculty of Advocates and at the bar and in the judiciary, and we stopped it because, again, it was unnecessary. We actually suggested to them you could hold trials via video link to cinemas, and that's what they're doing. Our juries sit in cinemas, but that wouldn't have happened had we in the Lib Dems not taken a stand against it.
And I just wanted to touch on again something that probably had, for maybe anybody who outside of Scotland didn't know who you are, it was probably maybe the biggest introduction to them, and you've spoke about this in the last week or so, which was obviously in the last term of Parliament, the rather contentious Alex Almond inquiry. And you mentioned, obviously, I believe you said you have some regrets over perhaps your part in that. I just wanted to maybe touch on what your thoughts are in retrospect about it. And in my opinion, I thought yourself and Jackie Bailey probably came out of it the best in terms of all the people that had to be involved in that shambles.
Well, thanks, David. I appreciate that. I mean, I don't regret my behaviour. Or anything I did. I regret my involvement in it, though. I mean, there were several reasons why. I mean, first and foremost, it became quite clear early on that this was it was going to become a circus, and it did become a circus. I don't think there was any more light shed on the matter. There was a lot of smoke and heat, but certainly no light. I've said in the press, and with her permission, that I have been supporting a complainer who came to me independently, and I could see what it was doing to her, each twist and turn, and particularly the longevity of it, the detail that we went into. And I just thought, well, that must be happening to everyone who's affected by this tawdry affair. And it took up so much oxygen, and it was exhausting, and it was dark. It was so dark, and you just felt that you at times were refereeing this internecine SNP culture war. And yeah, I didn't enjoy it. I don't think I learned anything, and I don't think we achieved anything.
It certainly seemed the only thing that perhaps I think came out of this was there was a complete failing of the women who came forward with the allegations. And it seems that all got lost amongst the circus that was Nicola Sturgeon versus Alex Almond.
Yeah, and we produced a very substantial report about what needs to change. And to my knowledge, that is gathering dust on a civil service shelf somewhere, and nobody's doing anything to rectify it. So, I mean, honestly, if you were a civil servant of any gender, would you have any faith in reporting sexual harassment or allegations of sexual harassment in the Scottish government right now? No, you wouldn't, because they were thrown under the bus. They became collateral damage in an internal civil war within the party of government.
And just appreciate this is going to be a rather broad question, but if you can give me the opportunity. So you're the new leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats, and you talked about your hopes for really Scotland and the party as a whole. But what we had a very interesting discussion the other day there with Leila Moran about what a liberal international policy looks like. So what does a liberal Scotland look like, or what if Alex Cole Hamilton was the First Minister of Scotland, what would Scotland look like under your leadership?
Well, firstly, we'd stop talking about the Constitution. We'd look to work with colleagues in the rest of the UK to reform the UK from within and make it better, make it what it could be again. Secondly, we prioritise the day job, the really important stuff. And for Liberals, that's about social mobility, about tackling child poverty by improving access and attainment in education. It's about dealing with the crisis stuff in our mental health service, again, which has largely been caused by ministerial disinterest, because people don't really suffer in the way that they do in Scotland and other parts of the UK. I think we need to treat people like grown-ups as well. I want to start doing that. I think at the moment, Nicola Sturgeon, when she was health secretary, passed a law saying that there would be a guaranteed treatment time of 12 weeks for any patient. That once you agreed a course of action with your consultant, that treatment would begin within 12 weeks of that decision. And everyone gets a letter saying that they'll be seen in 12 weeks. People make plans around that. People decide that they can go on that once in a lifetime round world trip after their convalescence, only to be told, get that annoying sense in their gut that they've not heard anything from the hospital come week 10. They ring up and they say, oh, yeah, you're not going to be seen for a year or more than that. And it's devastating. And again, I think people would understand if they were straight and said, look, this is when we expect you're going to be seen. It's probably going to be 35, 40 weeks. People might, if they've got independent means, might go private and say, okay, well, I'll give my space to somebody else. Or they might just say, okay, well, that's going to be a long time, but at least I know. But we're not doing that. So sorry, I got into a bit of detail about that, but I think it was important because it's about treating people like grown-ups and being straight with them about the problems in public service and how it's going to impact on them.
John?
Yeah, so I want to kind of make sure we have a kind of positive view of this as well. I don't like to talk about the opposition. Everything is rubbish. Yeah, no, but I do think the Lib Dems in Scotland always fill me with a great sense of pride. Even though I'm not Scottish, I'm from the borders originally. I'm on the English side of it. I look up to the wonderful teams that you have there and just think you guys really do punch above your weight. And actually, so we're not a million miles away from a general election. We're probably halfway there now. So what's the kind of health of the Scottish Lib Dems running up to that election? Where do you want to be in after the next Westminster election?
Well, that's kind of easy to say, John. And yeah, I should apologise to listeners. I have been rather gloomy. It's quite hard not to be. I mean, after everything we've been through, Scotland needs new hope right now. And I think that can come from the Lib Dems. I think we stand where so many Scots stand who are not enamoured with either Nicola Sturgeon or Boris Johnson. They don't have to believe that that's the only choice that we have. I think we surprised everyone. And David mentioned it earlier that, despite it becoming such a binary choice in Scotland between the union with the Conservatives or independence with the SNP, that we managed to hold our ground and in fact run it up in our constituencies, in our health constituencies. My hope is growth. I think we've got an opportunity, depending on boundaries, of course. I mean, they might just cancel the existence of the one seat that we could easily take in Eastern Bartonshire, but we're going to move forward with optimism and fight to win that. And I'm confident, given the results in our constituencies, that we can easily hold and improve on our position. And let's remember, we are a significant chunk of the UK parliamentary party. We have saved the UK parliamentary party in the last couple of elections by returning as many MPs as we do. And remember, that's against the context. That's in a five-cornered fight. It's not us v the Tories v Labour, it's us v the Tories v this megalith of the SNP that take 50% of the vote just by rolling out of bed. But yeah, I'm optimistic and hopeful.
Final question from you, David.
Yeah, so final question from me, Alex, and this might be a bit of a strange one, but obviously we had a discussion with Willie Rennie, who was obviously leader of the party in Scotland for 10 years, and obviously everybody has different leadership styles, and I wouldn't expect you to say, well, I'm going to carry on in the same, but does this mean the end of the Big Willie Rennie stunts, or will there perhaps be any Alex Cole-Hamilton big stunts? Could we see you perhaps parachuting from a plane?
I was actually part of a lot of the stunts that Willie Rennie pulled. I was always the kind of Robin to his Batman in those photo shoots. So they will continue to a degree. Absolutely. I mean, look, just want to say a word about Willie. He's one of my best friends. He has the most recognisable smile in Scottish politics. And I think thanks to him, he has captured a kind of affection for the party that had been lost to us during the days of coalition. There was a warmth for us now, and that's down to him, for no question. And he, I think, consolidated our survival. People aren't talking about our extinction anymore in Scotland. They know we're here to stay. But the analogy I use is slightly a stretched one, but it's quite a good one. I mean, there's a great film called Fire in Babylon, which is about the rise of the West Indian cricket team. And for years, the West Indies had been described as calypso cricket. They'd been the halftime entertainment. You know, they were really great crowd pleasers. They were really full of personality, but didn't win many trophies. And then in the 70s, they introduced the world to a new kind of fast bowling and started breaking jaws, and then dominated the game for long. So for many years after. And I think that we've been through the kind of calypso cricket phase with Willie, that we're thought of in warm ways and with affection by the public, but we've not won many trophies. I think what I want to do is keep some of that going, but also bring on the fast bowlers.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Ted. We know how busy you are, so we really do appreciate all your time, Alex. And like I said, always on the podcast, you and your team, or a free invitation. Come back whenever you want. If you need to sound off about anything that's happening north of the border, you'll always have an audience here. But no, on behalf of myself and David and Alex, thank you everyone who's tuned in, whether this is listening on the podcast, wherever you get it, or on Facebook and YouTube. We really appreciate you logging in. Do follow Alex on Twitter, always good fun. See what kind of stunts he now does as Batman, which will be really interesting. And to make sure you follow David as well. All the links will be in the show notes. But thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Alex, once again. And we'll be back with another episode very soon.
Thank you.